Biden literally just announced a $1.25 billion military aid package to Ukraine, and it's going to include a whole bunch of shit. Artillery shells, Stinger man pads, Hawk missiles, Nassams missiles. So the $1.25 billion military aid package, it's a lot of money. If you recognize that we're in a mutually hurting stalemate, then the package doesn't really, it's like pouring water on a fully wet sponge. I have believed from the jump that it's an unwinnable war for Ukraine in any normal sense. And within the like MSNBC sort of Washington world, that's an extremely unpopular take. And despite thinking that like Ukraine cannot win in any normal sense, I've also been on the record sort of reluctantly supportive of arms to Ukraine. I've wanted other things to go along with it, like debt relief and, policies that would strengthen Ukraine's working class. Like labor organizing has taken it on the chin in Ukraine. And in fact, there's like a lot of right-wing elements in Ukraine that are sort of benefiting from the larger context of having a war environment, having no love for fucking Russia and having no love for an imperial power doing imperial shit. My prescription from the start has been that the second we recognize the situation as a mutually hurting stalemate, we must negotiate a settlement, even if that means Ukraine has to lose some territory. So William Zartmann is this scholar who developed this concept of the mutually hurting stalemate, and he identified it as a situation that is ripe for conflict resolution, ripe for peacemaking. A mutually hurting stalemate is when the situation is negative sum, not win-win and not win-lose, where one gets but the other loses, but where it's negative sum. And so in battlefield situations where the longer the conflict plays out, the more both sides are hurt by it. So time is against both parties, ripe for negotiated settlement, conflict resolution. That's how you unlock peace from a war situation, is to diagnose the mutually hurting stalemate and then to act accordingly. Russia's invasion reached the point of mutual hurting stalemate as soon as Ukraine was able to meaningfully fight back and meaningfully retake certain territories, even when it would lose those territories later. It was just the fact that it could repel Russia from parts of its territory that was sufficient to know that this was going to be a grinding war of attrition, which is what it has proved to be. And we hit that point within 3 or 4 months of Russia's invasion in 2022. Like, it was a mutual hurting stalemate way before the presidential campaign kicked off. And this is the trouble with the Ukraine heads in foreign policy. They don't want any compromise, any concessions. They want to ignore the balance of power and treat this as if it's an American proxy war almost, and it just ain't that simple. American involvement in this has to have limits. Nothing defending Ukraine is not worth it if the consequence is nuclear war, and the risk of that is manageable, but we have to keep that as a constraint in our heads. It means that this has to have limits. And then the only reasonable debate is about where the limits are, but also the condition that I had for supporting Ukraine military aid was always that there had to be an end game in mind. It can't just be endless war. It has to be providing arms with the goal of creating a mutual hurting stalemate. But like I said, we reached that point fucking almost 2 years ago. So what have we been doing since? What we've been doing since is refusing to acknowledge reality. We're seeking moral redemption in the primacy project. We're trying to transmutate American exceptionalism onto this other situation. We're trying to use Ukraine as our theater of agony to make us feel good. The unipolar moment is here to stay or some shit like that. like that American power is good after all. I think there's reasons to support Ukraine's defense on its own terms. I don't think supporting Ukraine's defense should vindicate the larger foreign policy project that kills and immiserates so many, including within America, but especially abroad. Trump is going to inherit a situation where he's going to demand a negotiated settlement, and it's probably going to be one that's unfavorable to Ukraine. The lament that the Biden people should have is that they didn't try to make a negotiated settlement happen on their watch, because they probably would not have made Ukraine eat it as much as Trump is probably going to make Ukraine eat it. $20 billion loan guarantee to Ukraine. $20 billion. And as a progressive, this is actually something that I think I've supported. Like I've said this whole time, there is no point in providing arms to Ukraine if you're not also going to provide sovereign debt relief to Ukraine. Cannot just do the war part of anti-imperialism and not do the anti-capital part, remedying capitalist immiseration part of the imperialism you're supposed to be confronting. So this $20 billion loan guarantee is huge. My concern about it is twofold. One, it says literally, I don't know if you can see this on the screen, the loans are to be repaid with proceeds earned from immobilized Russian sovereign assets. They're not getting $20 billion in Russian assets. Like, that's just not going to happen. And so, this loan, it's probably a $20 billion gift. I almost hope it is. And that's pretty egregious considering what's happening in America right now. Like we talked about the other day, record homelessness, rent distress through the roof. I just saw a thing yesterday in Financial Times, record credit defaults in America, or not record, going back to 2010, there hasn't been so many credit defaults, right? So basically the global financial crisis. And like all of that's happening in America at the same time that we're doing, austerity economic policies in America, and then providing this $20 billion loan to Ukraine. But it's a loan that's going to have to be gifted because the claim that we're going to recoup this in Russian assets is not realistic. If we treat this as a kind of debt forgiveness, okay, good. But what about America? There's an easy comparison here. If you're an average American, that's like, well, what about us? What about me? And the alternative that's possible, especially under a Trump administration, if depending on how long this $20 billion loan is supposed to take to be repaid, if MAGA is in power, it is not going to be debt forgiveness. You can fucking believe that shit, right? It's going to be making Ukraine debt slaves to the West. They're going to owe, and they're going to have to eat austerity for a long time to repay it in the same way that the global South has to. Like, this makes this $20 billion loan is either going to come at the expense of spending this money in America, or it's going to make Ukraine feel the pain that the rest of the global South tends to face, and that's bad either way. It's a tough situation, and then the 1.25 billion in arms, it's like, okay, I mean, I guess this is a giveaway to American defense contractors, but like it's a failure to recognize that getting to peace, getting to settlement starts from a mutual hurting stalemate. And that condition already exists, and Trump is going to reap the benefits of that because he's the one who's going to preside over the sort of pausing or termination of the war. And that's fucked. And so once again, it's like Democrats and foreign policy mandarins, they're basically like the world's worst politicians. Like, they fucking continuously don't get it. There was a MAGA Twitter account that shared a little video critiquing this $1 billion aid package to Ukraine. And I don't believe the MAGA shit. I have problems with this, but I want to share it because it's like, it shows something. It shows a political messaging thing that is hard to trump, if you will. All right, you get the picture, right? It's not even clear to me that this video is actually in America, but it illustrates a point, a propaganda point that is irrefutable, right? Like, look what she's saying. Biden sending $1.25 billion more to Ukraine. That's the kind of messaging that is like low-hanging fruit because it's speaking to something true. Now, what do they want to do with it? They want to create a, white supremacist patriarchal society and turn to, imperialism and Monroe Doctrine 2.0 and, World War III with China. Like, they want to do all kinds of heinous shit, war on sanctuary cities. But where they want to take this energy is, of course, a dark nightmare. But the critique that is the foundation of where they want to go. The critique speaks truth. If you really value American support to Ukraine, whether it's that ginormous loan or the military aid or both, you cannot sustainably do that if you fucking ignore the real problems, the mass problems experienced, the economic insecurity experienced in America. It is obvious that our approach to Ukraine is politically unsustainable, and it was obvious from the second MAGA decided to politicize aid to Ukraine. As soon as that happened, the game was over. It meant that the way that we are supporting Ukraine was going to be unsustainable because we don't do a commensurate level of support to Americans themselves. That's fucked. We give our enemies this low-hanging fruit messaging.